This is Monse Sanchez, and today I'm going to be presenting on the bones of the pectoral girdle and the upper limb. Starting off with the bones of the pectoral girdle, they include the scapula as shown right here and the clavicle. Now starting off with the scapulae are also known as the shoulder blades. They are located on the dorsal surface of the rib cage, and the articulation is between the head of the humerus and the glenoid cavity of the scapula. The landmarks include the superior border, medial border, lateral border, inferior angle, superior angle, spine, acromion process, coracoid process, scapular notch, glenoid cavity, supraspinatus fossa, infraspinatus fossa, and the subscapular fossa. And note that this is an irregular bone. Starting off with the landmarks of the anterior view, we have the coracoid process of the scapula. So not get confused with the coronoid process of the ulna. I just think that C comes first in the alphabet, then N, and also the scapula is higher than the ulna. Next we have the glenoid cavity. For the glenoid cavity, I just think of like a regular cavity that needs to be filled, and this would be filled with the head of the humerus. Next is the lateral border. Just this long border that goes out towards the humerus. Then we have the scapular notch. This is like a little indent, just like a little notch. That's what I just remember from. And then we have the subscapular fossa. Then we have the medial border going in towards your spine, just like medial, middle. And then we have the inferior angle of the scapula, just like the inferior below. Moving on to the posterior view of the scapula. This is a superior border of the scapula. Next to it, we have the superior angle of the scapula, superior above. And then we have the supraspinatus fossa of the scapula, which is this little area. And then we have the spine of the scapula, which just resembles like a spine. And then we have the infraspinatus fossa of the scapula. Infra, below, supra, above. And then lastly, we have the acromion process of the scapula. It's right next to the coracoid process of it, but it does stick out further than the coracoid. And to remember scapulae, just think of a spatula. They both are semi-flat and have an anterior and posterior side. Now moving on to the clavicle. The clavicle is also known as a collarbone and have an S shape that extends horizontally. It is easy to identify because of the shape and also connected to the acromion process of the scapula. Now moving on to the bones of the upper limb. They include the humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanx, shown here in the picture next to it. Now starting off with the humerus, aka the funny bone. It is the largest bone in the upper limb and articulates with the scapula at the shoulder and with the radius and ulna at the elbow. It has an anterior and posterior view. The name humerus has a sounding word of humor, so I tend to associate it with the word funny. Now the landmarks of the humerus. Starting off with the anterior view, we have the greater tubercle, which is greater, and this is the lesser tubercle. So I don't get these two confused. I always think of what's higher and then lower. Then we have the intertubercular groove of the humerus. This is just like a little groove that runs between these two. Then we have the deltoid tuberosity. Just remember it by a little angle sticking out. Then the nutrient foramen of the humerus, like a little hole. You will see where the nutrients would go. Then we have the capitulum of the humerus, just like a little circle, cap, like a hat, circular. And then we have the medial epicondyle of the humerus. I always remember it being next to the bow, little bow shape, which is the trochlea of the humerus. It reminds me of a bow because a bow would sit where your trachea is, but do not get these confused. And then we have the lateral epicondyle. The lateral epicondyle, even on this side, on the anterior view, would be right next to the capitulum. Next, we have the olecranon fossa. It's just like a bigger indent right next to the trochlea. Next, we have the surgical neck. The surgical neck just goes right here around this little groove. And above it, we have the anatomical neck that's below the head of the humerus. Now, moving on to radius. It is a long bone that extends to the humerus and has a circular top, which makes me think of a mathematical radius. It articulates with the humerus at the capitulum, and immediately the head of the radius articulates with the radial notch of the ulna. Now the landmarks of the radius. They're pretty simple because these are only 3, but we have the head of the radius, then we have the radial tuberosity of the radius, just like another angle sticking out, and then we have the styloid process of the radius. The styloid process reminds me of a stylist pen, because of like the little round tip it has. Next, we have the ulna. It is a long bone next to the radius in the upper limb, and it is the main bone forming the elbow joint with the humerus. The ulna trochlear notch articulates with the humerus trochlea, and the ulna's proximal end articulates with the head of the radius. And to remember this bone, I think of a moon. The name ulna sounds like luna, so in Spanish it's moon, and also it's shaped like a crescent moon. Now moving on to the landmarks of the ulna. Starting off, we have the olecranon process of the ulna, which is the very top. Going back over here, this little peak is the olecranon process of the ulna. Then the indent is the trochlear notch of the ulna. Next, we have the coronoid process of the ulna. Remember, do not get this word confused with the scapulus coracoid. N is more farther than C in the alphabet. And then we have the radial notch of the ulna. It's just like a little notch again, easy to identify. And then the styloid process of the ulna, again, a stylist pen. The tip of the stylist pen is like ball shaped. And now for the carpals. They are the bones of the hand closest to the radius and ulna. There are 8, but we only need to know 2 of them. And they are the scaphoid bone and the lunate bone. The best way to memorize the scaphoid bone is by resembling it to a bean. Even though they all look like beans, I think that compared to the lunate bone, it looks completely different. Also, the lunate bone is smaller than the scaphoid bone. Now the bones of the carpals. It is good to know the anterior and posterior side of the carpal bones to be able to identify them with no problem. That being if it's the right or the left hand. I always like to remember that the scaphoid bone is going more towards your thumb and the lunate bone is behind it. Now moving on to the metacarpals. There are 5 bones numbered from the thumb as your first to your pinky as the 5th. They are identified using Roman numerals. And metacarpals just reminds me of M, middle, between the carpals, metacarpals, and then the phalanx. Metacarpals will be in the middle. Now the bones of the metacarpals. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Starting from your thumb as 1, your pointer finger as 2, middle as 3, ring as 4, and then pinky as 5. Now moving on to the phalanx. We have the proximal phalanx going from 1 to 5, the middle phalanx going from 2 to 5, and then the distal 1 to 5. And these are the phalanx bones. This chart or this image will help you identify them clearly. The distal again starts from your thumb being 1, pointer 2, middle 3, ring 4, pinky 5, and then the middle phalanx. Always remember that there is no middle phalanx on the thumb. So it would start from 2, pointer finger, 3, middle, 4, ring, 5, pinky, and then the proximal phalanx would be the ones closer to the metacarpals. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I always like to think of proximal. Proximal is close, middle, obviously middle, and then distal, distant, so further out. Now bone shape identifiers to remember. Remember that irregular bones learned today include the scapula. Long bones include the humerus, radius, ulna, and metacarpals. The sesamoid bones include the scaphoid and the lunate. And the short bones include the proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, and distal phalanx. Now, trivia questions. Name, bone, and what landmark is being pointed out? Go ahead and pause and write your answers down. Did you get them right? This right here is the scapular notch of the scapula. Next, we have the lesser tubercle of the humerus. And then this right here is the scaphoid carpal bone. Thank you for watching. I hope this presentation helped you learn a little bit more about the bones and where they are and how to identify.